CJ Holmes, founder of Homeowners for Justice, and your host today for Weekdays Live. And again, we bring you more nasty news, but I do want to say before we start talking about the secret government bank settlements, which should be no surprise, I do want to let you know that we've gotten some positive feedback about our efforts yesterday, which culminated yesterday in the live stream show of the video explaining to the attorney generals the information that I was sending them. That was the point of yesterday's show, to give them a web link that they could listen to see an overview of the kind of information that was going to be included, that is included in the 18 properties that I analyzed. The fact is, and the end result is, 100% of the notices of default are void. And I just want to make another statement because I've said this now a couple of times, and this is the bottom line. The question comes up, why do the banks forge the documents? And of course they're getting away with it, we know that. The answer is because there is not a real owner. Mark my words, if there was a real, honest owner of that loan, do you think they would stand for a minute that the banks are forging documents, that they're making stuff up, that they just treat it like a production line of documents, that they just send out millions of them to be recorded in recorders' offices? No. If you owned that loan and you had some servicer starting to run amok like that, whoa, you'd stop it. They'd be in prison. You'd have the real note to show that you were the owner. You would be going to the district attorney, the attorney general, just like that. So the answer is, since nobody's doing that, that is the point. We know they prove, their actions prove they do not own the notes. So mull that over. This is one of those, it's all about the deadbeat homeowner. No, it isn't. It's all about insurance fraud, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit more. But before we do that, I wanted to highlight a few things that have come to my attention in the news. Obviously, the secret government bank settlements. Again, our hero Elizabeth Warren, is out there against the banksters, and we must connect with her and everyone willing and wanting and trying to stand up against the banks. And we need to just literally get rid of the government people that are not supportive of the people. They're on the side of the banks. They've already been bought off, and that's where they're at. So, I also want to point out that it is now being called, the bailouts are being called a generational offense. And that's a fascinating concept to me. I wanted to share that with you because it truly has taken away, sucked up the wealth of a specific generation. The people in my age bracket, our age bracket, that owned property, that put down payments, that made loans. And we're the generation that actually really believes we should pay people back. If we're going to borrow something, we're going to pay them back. I mean, this is one of the foundations of our generation. And so how are we going to fight back? Well, there's many things we can do, and I do want to give a highlight of an interview I had this morning. I was on the air with Air Occupy. When I get a link to that show, they're going to send me a link. I'll be able to link it on live stream. You can listen to it. But the fact is, they're really fighting. They're based in Florida. They're fighting just the millions of foreclosures, the people that are now in homeless tents in tent cities. And the fact is, the banks and the government just want to speed it up. Just do it faster. They call it the rocket docket. You may have heard that before. So let's start by looking at some of these secret government settlements. Two different articles I'm going to point out about this today. They're both the same, written a little bit differently. I think they're both important. And this is the fact that the Federal Reserve has signed a secret agreement and agreed to provide testimony on behalf of Bank of America in returns for, I've already sort of mentioned that. The Federal Reserve is now going to side with the banksters. And when you think about that, when you think about who owns the Federal Reserve, it's not a big surprise. Let's remember, let's never forget that who owns the Federal Reserve is Chase and Citigroup. Okay? They are the major owners of the Federal Reserve. So it is no surprise whatsoever that the Federal Reserve issues trillions of fiat credit to the banks. Doesn't have any clue where it goes. Why would they want to tell us? They don't want to tell us. They just want to manipulate our money, the money supply, the fiat credit, produce all the benefits for themselves in their own pockets, and to hell with the rest of the planet. And we're on the rest of the planet. So we need to rise up and stop them. So here's an article. And of course, these disclosures, these settlements are not getting any media attention. And they're saying, why not? Well, the fact is, why should they? They don't care about it. They don't care about you. They don't care about truth. They are not set up in your vested interest. Let's never forget that. So the government cut a deal with the bank's lawyers to keep it quiet, a no press release clause that requires, now see, why would the FDIC agree to this? Because they wanted to, not because they care about you or me. Let's remember who their owners are. So this clause now requires the FDIC never to mention the deal except in response to a specific inquiry. Clever, isn't it? It's the banksters, the foxes conspiring with the foxes while they eat up the chickens in the hen house. It is as simple and straightforward as that. They've handled hundreds of scores of settlements the same way since the mortgage meltdown. It's a major policy shift from previous crises. Let's see. Previous crises put the heads of the savings and loan in prison. So, gee, it's a shock, isn't it, that they don't want to do it the same way this time. We want to just take everything and we don't want to go to prison. That is the point. The next article here is that I'm going to link. FDIC hides scores of bank settlements since 2007. Sure, they collected $54 million from Deutsche Bank in a settlement over unsound loans. And we wonder if that's unsound or if that's drug money laundering. The point is, when you're reading even these articles that are exposing what is going on, a lot of times it's far worse. And so the FDIC's excuse is unpersuasive. It amounts to, well, we tell you about the big stuff, so why bother with the little stuff? Any excuse will do. I swear, the more I look at these arguments and the things going down and the fraud being done, the more I feel like these are just junior high kids on a schoolyard. They're just bullying the others and they're getting away with it. And the rest of us, the non-bullies, we have to stand up and defend ourselves. So here's one. Here's someone defending ourselves. So listen to this. This is fabulous.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you all three for being here today. You know, as Senator Reid just pointed out, the United States government takes money laundering very seriously for a very good reason. And it puts very strong penalties in place. In addition to monetary penalties, it's possible to shut down a bank that's been involved in money laundering. Individuals can be banned from ever participating in financial services again, and people can be sent to prison. Now, in December, HSBC admitted to money laundering, to laundering $881 million that we know of for Mexican and Colombian drug cartels, and also admitted to violating our sanctions for Iran, Libya, Cuba, Burma, the Sudan. And they didn't do it just one time. It wasn't like a mistake. They did it over and over and over again across a period of years. And they were caught doing it, warned not to do it, and kept right on doing it, and evidently making profits doing it. Now, HSBC paid a fine, but no one individual went to trial, no individual was banned from banking, and there was no hearing to consider shutting down HSBC's activities here in the United States. So what I'd like is, you're the experts on money laundering. I'd like your opinion. What does it take? how many billions of dollars do you have to launder for drug lords, and how many economic sanctions do you have to violate before someone will consider shutting down a financial institution like this? Mr. Cohen, can we start with you?
Certainly, Senator. No question the activity that was the subject of the enforcement action against HSBC was egregious, both in the money laundering that was going on in the HSBC and the sanctions violations. For our part, we imposed on HSBC the largest penalties that we had ever imposed on any financial institution. We looked at the facts and determined that the appropriate response there was a very, very significant penalty against the institution.
Let me just move you along here, though, on the point, Mr. Cohen. My question is, given that this is what you did, what does it take to get you to move toward even a hearing, even considering shutting down banking operations for money laundering?
So, Senator, we at the Treasury Department, under OFAC and FinCEN authority, don't have the authority to shut down a financial institution.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, and I just need to move this along, but I'm not hearing your opinion on this. You are supposed to be, Treasury is supposed to be you are the leaders in how we understand and work together to stop money laundering. And I'm asking, what does it take even to say, here's where the line is. We're going to draw a line here, and if you cross that line, you're at risk for having your bank closed.
So, Senator, we're mindful of what our authorities are, mindful of what the supervisor's authorities are. We will and have and will continue to exercise our authorities to the full extent of the law. The question of pulling a bank's license is a question for the regulators.
So you have no opinion on that? You sit in Treasury and you try to enforce these laws, and I've read all of your testimony. You tell me how vigorously you want to enforce these laws, but you have no opinion on when it is that a bank should be shut down for money laundering? Not even an opinion?
Of course, we have views on...
That's what I asked you for, your views.
But I'm not going to get into some hypothetical line drawing exercise.
Well, it's somewhere beyond $881 million of drug money.
Well, Senator, the actions, and I'm sure the regulators can address this issue, the actions that we took in the HSBC case, we thought were appropriate in that instance.
And I'll just say here, if you're caught with an ounce of cocaine, the chances are good you're going to go to jail. If it happens repeatedly, you may go to jail for the rest of your life. But evidently, if you launder nearly $1 billion for drug cartels and violate our international sanctions, your company pays a fine and you go home and sleep in your own bed at night, every single individual associated with this. And I think that's fundamentally wrong.
And don't we all? We all think that's fundamentally wrong. That's Treasury. This is the point. The regulators that are supposed to be in charge have been completely bought off. They're part of the banking cartel. Let's make no jokes about it and no mistake about it. The entities, the federal regulators that are supposed to be the foxes, supposed to be guarding the hen houses, are just flat foxes. And they may have, wool pulled over our eyes, but we need to support Elizabeth Warren and all the others that are starting to really push and make waves against the cartel. Let's just call it what it is. It's a cartel. I want to just put up here on the screen quickly, these are the people. I'm trying to keep track of the key political leaders and those that have media attention so that as you get connected to them, you can connect them to the people. They need to be connected with every movement for right and justice. Dennis Kucinich, Elizabeth Warren, Marcy Kaptur, William K. Black, Neil Barofsky, Sherrod Brown, Chuck Grassley, the local Democracy Now! Groups specifically are looking to fight back against the bank cartels and to shift the game, shift the platform. I want to talk a little bit this afternoon, later today, about how we're going to do that. What are some physical actions that people can do? And so here we go. Home is where the fight is. And again, I want to mention again, the fact is the foreclosure crisis has actually developed a niche market of people in this country of, anywhere from 10 to 20 million people. They're the ones either directly impacted in the past, directly impacted right now, looking to be impacted in the future, they're upside down, and all their families and friends. This is the market we need to go after. As we organize these people, help them keep their homes, have them help us break the media silence. This is where we can start to build a coalition and an organization that obviously wants restitution and justice. So as we solve the foreclosure crisis, I'm still very positive we can do that. So hang in there, keep fighting. As we do that, as we organize together, then we can actually start to shift the focus. Once you solve one crisis, we know that there is a whole long line of things that need to be done and changed. So here, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that the activists are doing here. Of course they fall behind in the mortgage payments. Of course the bank servicer lied to them. Of course they tried to modify the loan. And of course they're being foreclosed. It's like that is the pattern regardless of the fraud used to do so. So now we're in that pipeline where now it's the sheriff trying to evict him. And turns out that in this area, I think this is Minneapolis. The Cruz family in Minneapolis. Turns out that when the banks try to evict, they send a big dumpster. And so they call this the dumpster defense. When they evict you in Detroit, they bring a dumpster to throw away your belongings. So that's how they found out they were being evicted. Can you imagine? Last Halloween, a dumpster just shows up and you know you're going to get kicked out. This is just outrageous. This is just truly outrageous. So nevertheless, the activists, Eviction Defense Committee, they said, I know, so they filled the dumpster with leaves. The sheriff had to call for another dumpster. And that allowed them some extra time, a breather, to get a stay of the eviction in court. A month later, after a march on the bank and a packed court hearing, Fannie Mae backed off and told B of A to negotiate a modified mortgage. Now, considering that nobody owns these notes, this is absolutely outrageous. And again, they saved one family. All of this effort, well, to date, and we don't know for sure if it's going to be a lasting salvation for them. If the loan that they've modified will hold up and they won't be foreclosed again quickly and in secret. And I want to say again, if you've not heard, even if you've heard this before, don't ever, ever, ever forget, everywhere in the United States, on every property, every time they file a notice of default, it never, ever, ever expires. It has to be rescinded. And unless it's rescinded, it's virulent. It may be buried under there, and it may be not doing anything right now, and they may be taking their loan mod payments, and you may think this is great, and you've got the house, and then they can sell it out from under you. So always, always, always demand that they rescind the notice of default. Try to get that rescinded in court. Try to get them to rescind it when you agree to a loan modification. At this point in time, the only way I'm aware of to get notices of default rescinded is either to leverage the bank somehow to get that done or have a judge rescind it. And this is why they're so dangerous. They're just sitting out there on millions of properties. And even if they're not selling, you don't have a sale date, the fact is they can turn right around and sell it. And if they didn't give you notice, what you gonna do about it? you, the individual owner, is going to have to step up and try to fight back like these individual owners. And this is what is so completely wrong and unfair. Just like Elizabeth says, how much wrong does it take to shut them down? And that's my question to all of the attorneys general in this entire country, when I've proven that 100% of the notices of default that Recon Trust has filed on every property that I look at, that it's a void notice of default, then how many are we going to let them take? How much more theft are we going to allow? It's like the bridge has been knocked out and the cars are just driving over and just falling into the river. When are we going to put up a blockade and said no more? That's what we need to do, is take every one of these statements and get them to their attorney generals in whichever state you're in and show them the fraud that these banksters are using to take the houses, and demand they get an injunction against the foreclosure mills. We need to stop the paperwork. Then these people wouldn't have to be evicted. They wouldn't have to fight back. That is the point. That's really step number one. Here's a step that people can do. We're talking about what people are doing. Listen to this, just briefly.
My name is Patrick Russell, and I am an employee of Wells Fargo's Home Mortgage Division. I am also a former member and organizer for Occupy Minneapolis. Yeah! A few days ago, I found out that my friend Nick Espinoza was helping to organize a protest. And unlike other events of the past, that this one would be different. That this one would take place at my doorstep. That this action and gathering offered me a choice and a question. Everyone will have a moment when it's easier to be silent, to keep your head down, to take the money and not cause waves. In very real terms, the question was, how much is your voice worth? That's right, brother. Wow. Every once in a while, I stop and think about my work with the Occupy movement, collecting stories from the participants, hearing about why they came down to Government Plaza in the first place. There are so many people who need our help. This is why, even though I'm an employee, I felt called to speak up, despite the potential consequences.
Hey. And he goes on to talk about many of the utter disasters in this country, like the cost of a college education, like the foreclosures, like just it goes on, and you're welcome to watch it. But what I wanted to point out today is that this young man has decided that if he doesn't speak up, it's the cost of his voice. He's paying a cost. And I want everyone watching that to share with everyone you know. And the actual fact is this. They may think that it's too costly to stand up. But what they're not thinking about is the cost of not standing up now. The longer it takes for the people to rise up, the more the people lose. If we had been able to get to where we are today, a year ago, we'd have been a year ahead. I've pointed out repeatedly that California in particular is a sitting duck, because Washington, Oregon, Arizona, Nevada, they've all changed their laws already to stop foreclosures, to grind them to a halt. They've already started to step up to protect their owners. Have we? So just look at it from a thief's point of view. If he goes around the neighborhood and he sees all these other houses have alarm systems, he's gonna pick on the house that doesn't. It's a no-brainer. And that's another reason that California must start fighting back and must stop the theft and the foreclosure fraud, because we don't really have a whole lot to protect us. We have a little homeowner bill of rights, but nothing in there. Well, they say it has to be legal and competent documents, but they don't say that if you or I or somebody in California could actually just send an owner's statement of suspicious documents and show all the fraud that, boom, your foreclosure's over. No, you have to go to some court. You have to file some lawsuit. You have to try to spend more money. A lot of people don't have the resources. They can't find an attorney. There's tons and tons of people looking for attorneys and they can't find competent help. And so then they just give up. And they decide that right now they don't have a voice. And that's one of the major disasters of this battle, is that it really is at everybody's doorstep. It's right at the front doors. People are fighting to keep their homes. They think they're alone. They don't know where to turn and they don't know how to do it. I had mentioned earlier about the generational theft, the generational offense that the bailouts were. And so I want to show you why I've come up with that term. I've coined it from Daniel Hannan, who's talking about, this is in England, and he's talking about the Occupy Wall Street debate. It's a fascinating discussion. I've really enjoyed it.
At this stage, Mr. President, I should just say I agree and call it a night, shouldn't I? There's really there's no other response apt to the occasion. But you know what? While I'm on my feet, Mr. President, I'm going to say one other thing. The bailouts were an epical crime, where low and medium income people were required to rescue some extremely wealthy bankers and bondholders from the consequences of their own errors. This will one day be seen as a generational offence. The government has now admitted £60 billion, which the taxpayers put up, will never be reclaimed. In fact, the total cost of the bailouts was £1 trillion. We know where the money came from. We don't know where it is now. We don't know who's got it. There's been no accounting. And that happened. That happened, Mr. President, from a breakdown of the democratic system. It happened in those panicky days, in the immediate aftermath of the collapse of Lehman. Politicians were running around all over the Western world not knowing what to do. And in their panic, they turned to the one set of people who, by definition, could not give them disinterested advice, namely the bankers. They said, what do we do? Well, of course, the bankers said, subsidize the banks. You know what? If you'd asked the bakers whether to subsidize the bakeries, you'd have got the same answer. That's why they're not the people to ask. That's the whole basis of our democratic system. I remember those days very well. I was one of the only 4 elected politicians in Britain to oppose the bailouts at the time, on that first day. And I remember a very senior member of my party saying to me, you are on your own on this. No one agrees with you. Left to right, there is an absolute consensus. We've got to save the system. He said, all right, you and Ron Paul, referring to the maverick American Republican. Well, a week later, the first opinion poll came out, and I was able to email this very senior member of my party and say, look, it turned out to be me, Ron Paul, and 87% of the British population. Because people understood, even if their leaders didn't, that it was wrong to clobber the little guy in order to reward the corporate. So why am I... And I am on this side unhesitatingly because the Occupy crowd are occupying the wrong place. I mean, in this country, they were literally occupying the wrong place. They set out to occupy the stock exchange. They ended up in St. Paul's Cathedral on grounds that it's kind of, well, vaguely near the stock exchange. But you know what? Even if they'd had a better sense of direction and found the place they were after, they'd have still been occupying the wrong place. There is a world of difference between being pro-business and being pro-market. Sometimes those two positions happen to coincide. Often they do not. Corporatism is not the same thing as capitalism. I want to challenge 3 propositions in the short time I've got. I was a journalist before I was elected, so I recognize when a story has passed the point of correction, and these have probably all passed that point, but I'm going to have a go anyway. First of all, the idea that we are living through a failure of capitalism, crisis of the market system. Secondly, that the banking collapse was caused by a lack of regulation. And thirdly, the idea that we have been brought here by greed, by human weakness. We start with the first one, the failure of capitalism. I mean, I can't believe I'm having to come to the Oxford Union and explain that subsidies and nationalisations are the opposite of capitalism. And yet that seems to be the contention of the Occupy crowd. In a capitalist system, bad banks would have failed, their profitable operations would have been sold to more efficient competitors, bondholders would have lost money, shareholders would have lost money, some depositors would have lost money, taxpayers would not have contributed a penny. The failure of a business and its replacement by a rival is not a sign that the capitalist system isn't working. It's a sign that the capitalist system is working, just as you weed your garden to make space for new growth. It's precisely that replacement of inefficient old producers by better new ones that has raised humanity to the highest standard of living we have ever enjoyed. Now you might say, well, all right, but what about the regulation? Well, we heard it from 2 or 3 of the speakers on the other side, there wasn't proper regulation. Just ask yourselves, with the exception of nuclear power, possibly of some television broadcasting, what industry is more regulated than financial services? The FSA handbook, the guide on how to comply with their regulations, is 10,500 pages long. The idea that this was a failure of regulation is the opposite of the truth, and that is an extremely dangerous mistake to make, because by responding to the crisis with further regulation, we repeat the mistakes that led to it in the first place, and we make the next one likely. Why? It was the cost of compliance that drove the small providers out of the market. It was the regulation that forced the consolidation, which is what created this wretched too-big-to-fail phenomenon in the first place. In a properly, the ideal system, the one we should aim at, is not a system where a bank can't fail, but a system where a bank can fail without it being a problem, without the taxpayer having to come and rescue it. In other words, where there is a plurality of small providers, each striving to offer a better service. We have the precise opposite of that. We have a series of zombie banks crawling malodorously with their bandages hanging off because we don't allow the market to take its natural course. Failure of capitalism, no. Failure of regulation, no. But let's take on the third of those propositions. The idea that what we're really doing on this side, whatever we say, what we're really doing is somehow standing up for greed. That our system is based on more selfishness or less generosity, less decency than the other. One very good point that the last speaker made. We are all fallen. If by greed we mean desire for material possessions, that isn't produced by socialism or capitalism or any other ism. That is, depending on your point of view, hardwired into the genetic codes we evolved in Pleistocene Africa, or else given by our Creator. But one way or another, that is a side of human beings. So the question then becomes, how do you harness that instinct in a socially productive way? And for all its imperfections, the market has up until now been the best way to do that. Why? Because in a capitalist system, to use the pejorative phrase, you fulfill your greed. In other words, you attain your desire for material possessions by providing a service to someone else. When I buy a program from Microsoft, I am enriching Bill Gates. I am adding fractionally to his net wealth. But he is enriching me because he's providing me with the program. Each of us has benefited from the transaction. Under every other system yet devised by human intelligence, a third party, a commissar or a king, gets to hand out the goodies. And the way you then enrich yourself is not by being productive to your neighbors, but by crawling to those who are in a position of power. The transformation of our planet, the rise of wealth to a level which a previous generation could not have conceived, came because of the development of markets and mass consumerism. In an aristocratic system, the way you got ahead was to perform for the patrons, for a small number of oligarchs. It was consumerism that made it pay for the people who had the inventions, who had the good ideas, to aim them at the rest of us. As the great economist Joseph Schumpeter put it, The princess was always able to afford silk stockings, but it took capitalism to bring them within reach of the shop girl. Let me close by asking you to think of who have been the real enemies of Wall Street, the real enemies of stock exchanges through the ages. They've got some pretty dishonourable foes. During the Second World War, the City of London was repeatedly targeted by the Nazis because they understood that the free market system was part of what they saw as our degenerate system, in other words, one based on free contract and personal liberty. The stock exchange was repeatedly singled out by Luftwaffe bombers. When the Soviet Union expanded, the first thing they would do, taking over a new country, would be to close down the bourse. And on September the 11th, the murderers struck at the heart of New York capitalism, well understanding that the thing they most liked and most disliked and resented about the West, the personal freedom, was represented in that building. Surely we are better than to line up with those kinds of enemies. So no, don't occupy Wall Street. Don't occupy the London Stock Exchange. Don't even occupy St. Paul's on the grounds that it's on the way. Occupy the central banks that have printed the money in order to get around the failures of a handful of banksters. Occupy the houses of the politicians who voted to give your money to people who were not prepared to live with the consequences of their own errors. And on your way to occupy those places, occupy the no lobby tonight and vote for freedom.
I love it. He focuses on where the real problem is. And Wall Street, I love the explanation that Wall Street represents free markets. But what's wrong is that the banks, the central banks, and the politicians that support them, and the agencies that have just caved into them and or are already headed by bankers, so that it's just a big cartel. That's where we have to occupy. So let's think about, how do we fight back against this? We have to. We have to keep fighting back. And I just wanted to share with you today, briefly, I was on the Air Occupy this morning with, that's in Florida, radio show. They live stream on the internet. They're going to send me a link to that later. And I want to just share with you the things we talked about, because there's two major issues they feel that homeowners are facing. And one is fighting back against the myth of the deadbeat homeowner, that it's all the homeowner's fault. I just have this the picture on the home page of Homeowners for Justice, where I've got that first, just a sec here. It just dawned on me. I wanted to show you this picture here. There we go. That one. It's all the homeowner's fault. They took out a loan they couldn't afford, and that has caused the collapse of everything. That's sarcastic. Give me a break. That is not the problem. And they really enjoyed, they've been looking at the website. So one of the first things they wanted to bring out and talk about, which I really haven't shown. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit right now to share with everyone where you find this information on the website. This is under fraud and corruption. And this is the crisis of fraud. And what I've got here is, if you will, a brief summary overview of my foreclosure teach-ins and town halls from the beginning, which was about a year ago, February, March 2012, to November 2012 was about the last time I did one in Mendocino. The graphic in these workshops and having a little presentation on the screen, I developed a graphic, The Heart and Cycle of Bank Fraud, to help people understand, in general, a couple of things. One, the banksters are at the heart of it. They did it all. where everybody outside is just a victim. So let's look at the victims real quickly. And then I'll show you down below the 12 steps of bank fraud. That this will really help clarify in your thinking and in the thinking of your neighbors, of our elected officials, really what went on. And really, homeowners had nothing to do with it. They were forced into not being able to pay in a variety of ways. And so they were just simply victims of fraud. So here's what they of course cheated the mortgage-backed securities. We've talked about that. They cheated the buyers. They created and sold toxic loans. They sucked people in. And every one of these loans violated all the truth in lending laws, every one of them, and were designed to blow up. That was the whole point. They planned this, and Catherine Austin Fitts said that when she was head of FHA back in the late 80s, they talked about the foreclosure crisis they're going to manufacture. So any myth about a deadbeat homeowner is simply coming from the banks who are forcing the media to say this. Of course, they used a database that they belonged to so that they could screw around with the records any way they chose. They never assigned the loans, all of this stuff that they should have done if they were actually going to have legal mortgage-backed securities with collateral. They just skipped that. They used these notes, bearer bonds, representing these notes for short-term collateral. And then, of course, since there are no owners, like I've talked about before, they had to robo-sign. Well, that's mean. They forged and faked every document to foreclose. Here's just a quick little sample of the 20 signatures of Linda Green. So they cheated all the buyers after they've cheated all the investors. They've cheated the IRS because it was supposed to be pass-through, long-term pass-through investments. So they haven't been paying taxes on this. So then they falsely recorded all the documents, and then they steal all the homes, and they get paid all the insurance money. So you notice that at every step, the money flows into their pockets. It's simply an incredible scam to cheat everybody and to do it without getting in prison. Just like we saw about the first thing this morning. Why do they have secret agreements with the FDIC? Well, number one, they control the Federal Reserve, and they just literally have said, we want this and we want to get away with it. That is the point. So the 12 steps of fraud, I've just listed those steps from the graphic. They cheat the county recorder's offices with those fees. They circumvent the SEC. Many of these were set up as foreign corporations. They bought off the ratings agencies, of course, because the ratings agencies said it was good when they didn't even have loans in them. They committed insurance fraud by having those insured, and they knew they were going to blow up and fail. They knew this, and yet they lied and said that these were valid and good loans. They cheated the investors out of the collateral. We talked about that. They've cheated the IRS by dodging taxes. They cheated all the truth in lending laws and violated that. They pushed borrowers into loans that they knew borrowers could not. That was the whole point. They intentionally, fraudulently induced 70 million borrowers to use these loans that would blow up. And of course, they stole the investors' money, and they fraudulently now foreclosed all the loan defaults to get paid again. And then, of course, they got paid using TARP and all these other services. Every settlement, articles will say 20% may come out of their bank pockets, and of course, it's not coming out of the CEO's pockets. They're going to make sure it doesn't come out of theirs. And then the rest of the 80% of the settlements coming out of the taxpayer. Or the investors themselves. It's truly a scam and a crime. And this is what we basically started talking about on my Air Occupy this morning, because they really want to fight back against that deadbeat homeowner issue. They wanted me to talk about MERS a bit, so I have here the MERS page, which is the MERS mess, under fraud and corruption, MERS mess. And again, they appreciated, I have found this explanation to be fairly helpful, and that is the way the MERS information description of MERS in the deeds of trust and mortgages that these 70 million borrowers signed. It actually states that MERS is the nominee for the lender and successors and assigns. The very next sentence says, MERS is the beneficiary. And in legal parlance, it's easier to understand if we just use animals, and so I've used animals. It's like saying that MERS, at the same time, this animal is a rabbit and a tiger. Well, they laugh. Yeah, it's laughable. The trouble is they're using that as a smokescreen to steal the homes and forge documents, and whichever one they want to use. Oh, we're just a nominee. Oh, whoops, we're the beneficiary. Now I can foreclose. You can't be both, and bankruptcy courts around the country have actually said and ruled MERS cannot be a beneficiary. It cannot take and receive value. It never had the loan. It wasn't their money. They have no standing in the note. Are you kidding me? And so, unfortunately, it's still such a fog, and so many lawsuits aren't written correctly or cannot address this in their lawsuit. And then they lose. It's really a mess. And they were very intentional. They were very, very shrewd and clever when they wrote this up. Mark my words. They knew exactly what they were doing. And they did it so they could steal the houses. Because in the end, they want the land. They're robber barons. If they own the land, then you and I have to be renters. And renters are just different mentality. They don't own the land. And so as renters, they can tell us what to do. You catching this? It goes back to what J.P. Morgan Chase said 100 years ago. Foreclose as fast as possible and turn these people into renters, because then we can control them easier. It's tougher to control owners who think they might have some rights. And do you remember? I've put these up specifically. I don't know if you watch while the lead music comes in, but this is the issue. This was said in 1875, that the issue which has swept down through the centuries and will have to be fought sooner or later is the people versus the banks. And that is the issue. The central banks create Federal Reserve notes. They create credit that you and I owe money on, interest on. It's debt to us. It's a note with interest payments to them, and they force us right now to use this as the medium of exchange. It is all about the money. Never ever forget that. So as we start talking about today, they wanted efforts. What can the people do to fight back? So I found myself talking about number 4. The recorded documents and proving the forgery on them and proving the fraud, analyzing them, making copies of these owners' statements, and plastering the planet with them. Because right now there is a media blackout. The media, I've been told by Occupy people that reporters have told them in private, we cannot write anything about the foreclosure crisis without approval from either their director or the head of the station, the media outlet. So the fact is there's a cartel sitting to the side. They're taking away all the media exposure to keep the people so that they can steal the homes. So here's this owner statement of suspicious documents. So helping your neighbor, sending out information to everyone facing foreclosure and helping them get their documents and filing this statement. These are things that we can do. I want to pull up the activism solutions and share the news. It's that first page right there. This is it. And this is right up here at the beginning is one of the key things people can do. I'm starting to do this in Sonoma County. We just sent out on Friday 300 letters to people facing auction to the end of March 31st. There's 310 homeowners facing foreclosure auction right now in Sonoma County that was Thursday the 7th and the 31st this month. There's almost 400 after that are still facing foreclosure auction. So we plan this week to send out another 400 letters. I'm doing that at my own expense. I've used the flyer here. There's flyers for the counties. There's flyers for the nation if you want to just use that. And then on the back, we printed two sides. So on the back, we printed the letter an open letter to homeowners that I've written, and ask me, sign up to Foreclosure Radar, get the people that are facing auction, they have the property addresses, so you can mail this right out to their addresses. That's what I did. I pulled them off. I'm mailing out these letters to these people saying, look, at least come check out the website, listen, watch that foreclosure defense considerations, file an OCC complaint, send a qualified written request letter, do something to stop and protect yourself and try to keep your house. That's one thing that we can do. You can print those and you can pass them out and put them out at businesses. You can give them to the city council members, send them to the supervisors or the commissioners of your county. Send it to the recorder's office. Have a stack sitting at the recorder. Wherever you can get them out, get them out. These are links to all of the little video snips. Here's one for the supervisor, one for the recorder, John O'Brien, one for the sheriff, that was in New Hampshire. This is the Kentucky Attorney General filing lawsuits. These are how these individuals around the country are stepping up. Send those links out. Send them to all of the people in your email addresses. We must fight back, and we need to broaden the exposure. And anyone that has any kind of connection with any of these people, please help them get involved in this movement so that we can share their commitment with us directly with our local officials and with our neighbors and families and friends. I wanted to point out something because I was looking at updating this chart and saying who these people were rather than just their names. William K. Black, very interesting. He actually came up with the concept, the term control fraud. And this is the heart of the fraud we're experiencing today. It's where the CEOs control the company, use the company to commit the fraud for their benefit. And of course, the company settles these claims with fines and fees. Nobody in the company goes to prison. This is what Elizabeth is challenging the Treasury Department about. How much fraud, how much law breaking does it take before we shut the company down? And she can't get a straight answer because all of these settlements, you notice, every last one of them, the banks will agree to the settlement, but they never admit any crime or wrongdoing. And that's the problem, because the settlement is just a fraud tax. It's never the entire amount that they got plus treble penalties. If it was that would put the company out of business many times, and we ought to be seeking for that. The other thing we can seek is for criminal prosecution. So take the fraud, the owner's statement of suspicious documents, the proof of fraud on your recorded documents, and send it to the Attorney General's office. I'm recommending you send me a copy. I will get it, whichever state you're in, I will get it to that Attorney General. I will make sure that they look at it and that Attorney General, those prosecutors in there, start criminal prosecutions, because the fact is these entities are criminal conspiracies. John O'Brien says that point blank. It's a criminal conspiracy. He doesn't pull any punches. The trouble is, we say that, but how do we get criminal prosecutions? If you have any ideas, please share them, because we all need to do something that's going to work. And right now we just keep trying stuff. My latest and greatest is let's look for fraud. Let's plaster the planet with this proof. Maybe when these media stations get 10, 50, 100, 1,000 owner statements of suspicious documents, and they see over and over and over and over and over that every last one of them has a void notice of default, and yet they're losing their homes, maybe they will decide this is time for news. This is not a blackout We need to support the people. As you'll note, we're fighting against the powers that be. It's just like we saw in London. The fact is, he and Ron Paul were the only ones, there are a few others, but the point is most of the politicians buy into what's being told them by the banks. They buy into, oh, if we don't bail them out, we're going to have a collapse of the financial system. Nonsense. That's nonsense. That's bankeries. Bankeries for the sky is falling, and if we're Chicken Little, and if you don't do this, the sky will fall. We must make sure our local officials, our local ones, our state representatives, and our federal representatives understand the sky isn't falling. In fact, if we don't stop the fraud, the sky might fall. It actually might come crashing down in ways that you don't like. For example, more and more bankruptcies, cities and states, more and more people going into foreclosure and filling up homeless in tent cities. All of this has been relatively slow moving. 5 years, we're going to have 5 more years if we don't stop it. So that's about it for today. Thanks for listening. Let us know the kinds of actions that you can take and want to take for fighting back. And let's see, where's our activism? Share the news. Just remember that it's real simple. Just a reminder before we go that you can open up the page just like I've got. Stick your cursor on it, click on it. See how I'm just clicking and holding and highlighting all that stuff? And then I release the click, it's all highlighted. If I go Control C or I right click and I said copy, it actually copies all of that information and all the links. And you can go right into your email, paste it, boom, you're done. So copy and paste these workshop links into an email, send them out, blast them out to your owners. Thank you. I'm doing everything I can to make activism easier. You have any ideas, please don't hesitate to share. And the plan is for tomorrow. I want to do the notary complaints. It's another workshop that has, it's a little bit more difficult, but now that I've got the Attorney General and all the fraud off being looked at and reviewed right now, we want to really hone in on how you file notary complaints, what a notary journal entry is, how you look at your documents to decide what you have to do next. Thank you. This is CJ signing off for today. We'll talk to you tomorrow.